I'm Leah Jennings, and I'm one of the practice managers here at Lung and Sleep, and I'm also one of the respiratory physiotherapists. So just to start with some housekeeping, a couple of things. I will just get everyone to make sure that your camera is turned on. One of the most important things in completing Zoom webinars is to make sure that we can see your smiling faces. Your microphone should have all been muted also, and it will remain muted for the duration of the presentation. Having said that, we do want to hear from you. So if you have any questions, enter them in the chat function, and I will endeavour to answer them before the end of the session. You can also type the word question in the chat box, and I will then unmute your microphone and you will be able to ask your question directly. So to get things started tonight, I might just tell you a little bit about Lung and Sleep to start with. So Lung and Sleep was established in Melbourne in 2012 by Barton and myself. And I guess one of our main passions was really to help and inspire as many people as possible to improve their happiness, quality of life, all by improving their lung and sleep health. So this passion has really evolved over the years with developing knowledge and lots of new learning in new areas. But ultimately, most of these lessons have led to the benefit of our patients in an enormous way. So at Lung and Sleep, we're supported by a team of amazing doctors. We've got 4 doctors that work with us, 2 physiotherapists, 2 respiratory scientists, and an amazing secretarial administrative team who are absolute champions. So tonight you will hear from Dr. Barton Jennings, a specialist in lung disease and sleep disorders. Barton has a drive and enthusiasm really to educate our community in all aspects of healthy living, but most importantly, what we nourish our bodies with and its impact on lungs and sleep. So now I will hand over to Barton.
Excellent, Leah. Thank you very much for the introduction, and thank you to everyone for coming along tonight. And as Leah said, welcome to, this is our 3rd presentation we've done for our patients and community. And the first 2 have been, good fun, and it all really started last year during COVID. And we realised, having spoken to lots of our patients in the clinic and things, that everybody was having a tough time. And what we wanted to do was come up with ways that we could try and give more back to our patients and community. And so we decided to run a few of these online talks. So this is our 3rd one. The first 2 are on YouTube. You can have a look at those if you're interested. Hopefully you got to see that Seinfeld clip. For those that arrived early, if you arrived late, you may have just missed it, but it was I'm always amazed actually how Seinfeld has an episode for every single aspect of life. And this one being on the low-fat yogurt, it's hard to say. And I'm sure that Jerry and Elaine's weight gain probably was contributed to by the low-fat yogurt. Having said that, Kramer's suggestion of the Oreos is probably a good one. That could well have contributed significantly as well. And did anyone actually notice that in the background there was all those boxes of cereal? I suspect that they were probably playing a role too. Anyway, so that's what we're going to talk about tonight. We're going to talk about how to lose weight and without being told to eat less and exercise more. So with that, I'm going to share my screen and bring up some slides. Just allow them to come up. And as Leah said, as we're going, we do encourage you to get on and use the chat feature. If you think of any questions as we go, put them into the chat. I'm going to bring up the chat here so I can keep a bit of an eye on it while we go. And if you have any questions, put them in there. I'll answer them as we go if it's about something I'm talking about. Otherwise, we'll keep them at the end and Leah's going to go through them and keep a record of those questions and pass them on to me. Alrighty, so here we go. So as I said, this is our YouTube channel. I encourage you to jump on. Leah, I might actually get you to put the link to our YouTube channel in the chat so you can check out our videos. And as I said before, our 2 previous talks that we've done, one on sleep which was purely just all about sleep. And the other one was a bit about sleep and also a bit about things to make you super fit to fight COVID, which we did last year, are on there. So I think we should just start off by getting used to the chat feature. And I want to ask everybody out there, has anybody actually tried to lose weight by eating less and exercising more? So if you've tried that in the past, put yes into the chat or I have or something like that, so we can get a bit of an idea as to whether people have attempted this in the past, because it's a common thing to do. Most people probably have. I mean, I'm sure everybody's heard that this is the thing to do. And so everybody's saying yes. Has nobody said no yet? Of those people who said yes, has that been an effective weight management tactic for you? And has it achieved weight loss sustained over a 6-month period? So the yeses seem to have gone on to no. Yes, that's one yes. Not sustainable, not sustainable. Exactly, it's not sustainable. Has anyone tried to eat healthy following the Australian dietary guidelines, which recommend a low-fat diet, minimising red meat, eating complex carbohydrates, and eating lots of fruit and vegetable? I'm sure everybody's seen this guidelines. And once again, has this been helpful to you? Has this managed to achieve the weight loss that you wanted to achieve, made you feel well, and managed it for 6 months? No. There's one yes, a few yeses, yes and no. Mostly no. What about Weight Watchers? Have people tried Weight Watchers or Light and Easy? Some of these programs work mostly on a caloric restriction or calorie counting. Has anyone counted calories or been through these programs with Weight Watchers and Light and Easy? And once again, have they been effective and have they worked? And in terms of working, I mean working over at least a 6-month period. So these are all pretty common things. And so what I want to do tonight is start by just telling you a bit of a story about myself, and also a story about the current dietary guidelines and how they originated. And then I'll share with you what I think you should be eating for optimal health, and also what you should be avoiding. And it's not based on anything except the science that we know that's been published in the medical literature. At the end of it, I'm going to leave you with a challenge, and I'll try and provide a lot of time for questions and discussion, as I said, so do certainly put in the questions into the chat. Yes, and lost count of the calories. Exactly. So why am I doing this talk? So Leah sort of touched on it. I'm a doctor specializing in lung disease and sleep disorders. So what am I doing talking about nutrition? I'm not a nutritionalist. I've never studied it in my life. As a matter of fact, everything I learned at uni about nutrition, I've since found out is false. So why are we doing this talk? And I guess, as Leah said, you know, over the years, we've developed this mission that what we want to try and do is to inspire and help as many people as possible improve their health with specialist attention to the treatment of lung and sleep disorders. But treating lung disorders and sleep disorders, you know, is what we've been taught to do at uni, and that sort of becomes the straightforward part of it. Improving people's overall health is more of a challenge, but it's actually much more rewarding and much more important. And so for that, I think what ideal health is built on these 4 sort of pillars of exercise. And we talk a lot about exercise in respiratory medicine and lung health. We're often helping people with difficulty with their breathing. So exercise is something we concentrate on a lot. We manage sleep disorders all the time. We're always improving people's sleep, treating underlying sleep disorders, improving quality of sleep, and getting people to sleep a longer period of time so they feel better during the day. But we also need to concentrate on nutrition and mental health, because I think these are the 2 other areas that are so important to our overall health. And so this has led me to develop an interest in nutrition. And it all sort of started for me in February of 2018. And we were going to a gym at the time called Eat, Play, Thrive. And Leah, my wife, said to me, hey, they're doing this 6-week low carb challenge. I think we should do it. And I said, what a load of rubbish. I don't believe any of that. That's just crap. Just forget about it. And she said, no, I think we should just try it. Just even if it's not going to work, we'll have a go and see what happens. And I said, okay, well, given that we eat together, like we should probably do this together. So I'll do it. However, you have to agree that after these 6 weeks, we're going straight back to how we were. Anyway, it was only about 2 or 3 weeks in that we made the decision that we were never going back to the way we were, because we started to feel really good. I'd already started to lose a bit of weight. I started to really quite enjoy all this food and didn't miss the bread. And I thought, this is quite interesting. I'm going to have a look into this. And so since then, I endeavored to do my own research in terms of reading the medical literature and things. And I actually found out so much about this, and I found it so interesting. And hopefully I'll be able to share a bit of those things that I found out about during this talk. So in a nutshell, what should we eat? We should eat a diet that's low in carbohydrate. We should avoid healthy oils. And these mostly come under the heading of seed oils, which I'll talk more about. But the vegetable oils, canola oils, and margarine as examples of common ones. And we should be eating a diet that's high in healthy fat.
So what should we eat then? Well, why don't we look at some animals that we know and love and think about what they eat? And did you know that animals who live in the wild, who eat what they were born to eat, don't get fat, don't get disease? So who knows what a koala eats? Just put into the chat there if you know what a koala eats. Yep, exactly. The koala eats eucalyptus leaves. So I could see a few people got that. What about a panda bear? What does a panda bear eat? A few ideas. Well, yeah, a panda eats bamboo and shoots. What about a polar bear? That's right, a polar bear eats seals. What about a giraffe? It's probably not going to eat grass, because why would a giraffe have such a long neck if it was just going to use it to eat grass from the ground? It tends to eat leaves from the tops of trees, and this is a giraffe eating acacia leaves. And so if we think about how we've evolved, we have evolved as hunters and gatherers. And so the men used to go out and hunt the animals, while the women and children would stay at home and forage around for food that was sitting above the ground. However, 12,000 years ago was the agricultural revolution, and hunters and gatherers turned into farmers. And this was the time when humans figured out how to harvest crops. And this meant that humans no longer had to hunt and gather their food to survive. Unfortunately, this led to a transition in our diet away from fats and protein and towards grains and cereals. However, unfortunately, this has now continued even further, and we have progressed to be ultra lazy and having ultra processed foods. And this is absolutely a problem for our health and the way that our eating habits should never have ended up.
And a lot of this stems back to this guy here named Ansel Keys. So Ansel Keys was a physiologist, and what happened in America after the First World War is that the government recognized that there was a significant increase in death from heart attack in the returning male soldiers. And so the government put out these research grants to try and find out the cause for why were these men having these premature heart attacks, and what could we do to solve the problem? And so Ansel Keys got himself on the front of the Time magazine in 1953, having published this paper. And what he did is he looked at 6 different countries, and he looked at the average amount of fat in the diet of the people in those countries. And then he plotted that against the number of deaths due to heart disease. And when he plotted that out, it looked like there was a linear relationship indicating that in a population, the more fat those people ate, the more likely they were to die of heart disease. So he suggested that an increased amount of fat in the diet was causing was the cholesterol level in the blood to go high, and the cholesterol was lodging in the coronary arteries, and that was causing heart attack. And I'm sure everybody here has probably heard that theory. And it all stemmed from this study. But the fascinating thing is that he completely rigged this study, because this study was not based on 6 countries, it was based on 22. And he had the data for all 22 countries, but he did not publish it. He only published the 6 countries. And so when you do plot the 22 countries, which has been only done more recently, you realize that the relationship is really not there, and it's certainly not as strong. And the other thing that was confounding this study is that he didn't take into account that some populations smoked a lot more than others, and that contributed to this false signal that they were getting. Since then, the World Health Organization has done similar studies looking at the mean cholesterol levels in many males across lots of different countries, and graphed that against the number of deaths due to cardiovascular disease. And this graph shows that although there's hardly any relationship there at all, there tends to be that a relationship where the higher your cholesterol, the less chance you are to die of heart attack. And if we plot the same data for females, the relationship's even a bit stronger. So since then has clearly disproved Ansel Keys' theory. However, it's his theory that formed the basis of the diet heart hypothesis, which some people may have heard of, but you will all be familiar with the dietary guidelines that have come about in 1977 and are still with us today, having only been changed a very small amount that was based upon Ansel Keys' study. And the result is essentially that they recommended a high carbohydrate diet and a low fat diet. And this was the dietary pyramid with all the breads and cereals down the bottom, suggesting that we should have between 6 and 11 serves a day, but we should not be eating healthy fats or meat. And so what's the result of that been for the population? Absolutely hideous and just terrible. And this is looking at the obesity rates in America, and looking at the percentage of the population who are obese was pretty stable till about 1980. And introduce the dietary guidelines and the population gets fatter. And that's certainly what we're seeing in Australia as well. And so unfortunately, we've evolved to a point where we're significantly going backwards, and we've evolved to obesity. It's a great shame though, because at the same time, this guy, John Yudkin, was also doing his own research, and his research data suggested that it was the dietary fat and dietary sugar in relation to ischemic heart disease. He suggested that it was the sugar and not the dietary fat. And in the late 70s, he published this book for the first time called Pure, White and Deadly, suggesting that sugar was the problem that was killing us due to heart disease and diabetes. People will be familiar with Robert Atkins because he got quite a bit of time on TV some years ago. And this is his first published book, which was in 1972. And he was also suggesting that it's the carbohydrates that's causing diabetes and heart disease, not the fat. However, unfortunately, at around that same time, Richard Nixon was up for re-election. And in order to try and keep the US farmers and the consumers happy, he industrialized the production of maize and soy. And he did this to keep the prices down to please the consumer and the profits high to please the farmers. And this led to an increased demand for grains. More recently, the pharma companies have become involved, and I'm sure most people would be familiar with Lipitor, being one of the more common cholesterol-lowering drugs and one of the most commonly used statins, which is a type of cholesterol-lowering drug. The problem with this is that Pfizer gets great benefit out of promoting the theory that high cholesterol causes heart disease because they can sell more medication. Up until recently, even our Dietetic Association of Australia took sponsorship money from food companies. And so food companies are starting to have a very powerful role in recommending what we should and shouldn't be eating. And here's from the Dietetic Association website, showing that Nestle was a sponsor and they were promoting them. It's only been about a year ago that the Dietetic Association has severed their relationship with Nestle because they realized that this vested interest could not continue. However, it wasn't that long ago, and you see here that Nestle is recommending that, the Dietetic Association of Australia is recommending that we have Milo as a healthy option for children. However, Milo is essentially just like pouring sugar into your mouth. More recently, the Dietetic Association of Australia suggests that breakfast is the most important meal of the day. So although they've got rid of a lot of their sponsorship, direct sponsorship, they're still being influenced because their smart eating ideas for brekkie is a bowl of whole grain cereal with milk, toast and sourdough, muesli, rolled oats, and all very high in carbohydrate. However, breakfast is the most important meal of the day was actually originated by Kellogg's, and they started that saying to try and sell more breakfast cereal. So we've had a run of problems, starting off with agriculture, leading to dodgy scientists. There was dietary guidelines that were false and heavily influenced by the wrong sorts of science, political influence, pharma companies, and also food companies, and they've all led us in the wrong direction. And it's really quite sad because the population has suffered. And so we're now left with the current dietary guidelines of Australia with this dietary pyramid that you can see with bananas and pineapple down the bottom, as well as potatoes. They're all very high sugar foods, and healthy fats still remain up the top. So if we've been told the wrong thing, then what should we eat? It's useful, I think, to think about, well, what actually is food and what makes up food. And food's made up of 3 macronutrients. So there's carbohydrates, fats, and protein, where the micronutrients are the vitamins and things like that, and elements that are within food that we need for our health. But food's essentially made up of the 3 macronutrients. If you have a diet with no fat in it at all, the human body will actually die. If you have a diet with no protein in it at all, the human body can't survive, you will die. If you have a diet with no carbohydrate at all, you can survive perfectly. As a matter of fact, you can survive quite well. A lot of people do it. The reason is because your body has the ability to generate glucose required for energy, for your brain, and for other metabolic functions from fat and protein. So we actually don't need carbohydrate in our diet at all. But what if we do put carbohydrate into our body? So what happens is that even if it's a complex carbohydrate or a starch, these are basically just molecules that you can see there that are just glucose molecules joined up together. So you join up a whole lot of glucose molecules and make it a starch or a complex carbohydrate. The problem is that once you eat it, it turns straight into glucose because they all break off and they form glucose, so they have the same effect on your body and your body blood sugar. And so this is a diagram from a GP in England named David Unwin, who made this infographic, and it's really useful to think about, I think. And it basically tells you, if you eat this certain food, how much teaspoons of sugar you're putting into your body. And so I don't know if anybody eats basmati rice. I'm sure that most people probably do. If you have 150 grams of basmati rice, you're essentially putting 10 teaspoons of sugar into your body. What about white potato? Like 9.1 teaspoons of sugar if you have 150 grams of potato. And what about apples and bananas? These foods are very high in sugar, and as soon as we eat it, it's getting broken down into sugar in our blood. Where on the bottom of there is eggs and broccoli, which essentially has no sugar. So once we eat the carbohydrate, it gets broken down into its little glucose molecules. It's all floating around in the blood. What we do is our body then secretes insulin, because insulin is required to reduce the blood sugar and keep the blood sugar or the blood glucose between about 4 and 6. And the way that the insulin does that is it takes the glucose molecules and just takes it into the cells. So if you put a lot of carbohydrate into your body, that leads to high amounts of glucose, which needs lots of insulin to get the glucose out of the blood and stuff it in the cells. This leads to high insulin levels, and high insulin levels is one of the main problems. Because if we have high insulin levels for a long period of time, our body gets used to that insulin hanging around, and we stop being so receptive to its effect. So where you used to be able to get rid of a little bit of sugar from your blood with a little bit of insulin, the same amount of sugar now takes more insulin because your cells are used to that insulin being around. So you produce more insulin. And as you produce more insulin and your tissues get more and more used to it being around, you become resistant to the effect of insulin. Insulin causes fat storage. And so when there's insulin around, it promotes the storage of fat. And so to lose weight, you almost can't lose weight if you're living in a state where there's lots of insulin around, because insulin is actively promoting you to store the fat and not allowing you to use it for energy. And if your insulin resistance goes on for long enough that the insulin actually gets to a point where it can't get the sugar into the cells enough, then the sugar starts to rise, and that's when you get diabetes. And so you can see that through having many years of putting carbohydrates and sugar into your body, there's quite a lag period where you have high insulin levels, but it's still managing to keep your sugar under control to a point where it just completely gives up, and that's when you're diabetic. So if that's when you're diabetic, you didn't start having a problem just recently, you started having a problem many years ago. But often that problem is not picked up on. Insulin resistance causes hypertension or high blood pressure. It causes inflammation and contributes to a lot of common diseases, cancer, cardiovascular disease, as we've heard a lot about, Alzheimer's disease, which some people call type 3 diabetes, because we believe Alzheimer's disease is really a disease of insulin resistance. So the more carbohydrates you eat, the more likely you are to become demented as you get older. Lung diseases, especially asthma, arthritis, a lot of inflammatory arthritis, autoimmune disease, and also neurological diseases. So to lose weight and to answer the question of the topic of the talk, what we need to do is we need to reduce our insulin levels so that our body can then start to metabolize the fat and get rid of it. And the way to reduce your insulin levels is to limit the amount of carbohydrates that go into your body. So we should be eating diet that's high in fat and protein. The fats and proteins are rich in nutrients, has everything in it that we need for our health. They also make you feel full. So people tend to get less hungry when they stop eating carbohydrates. Carbohydrates actually make you hungry. Have you ever noticed that if you have a breakfast of cereal or toast or something like that, a few hours later you get hungry again? But if you don't have breakfast, or sometimes if you have eggs and bacon or something a bit more fatty, then you can easily get through to lunch or longer without having to eat again. And fat and protein provides ample energy for your body to function optimally, including high intensity exercise and also long distance aerobic exercise. So it's actually not true that you need carbohydrates in your diet to perform at a high level from an exercise point of view. So what about heart disease? Everyone says, well, if you're going to cut out the carbs, you're going to eat all this fat, you're going to get heart disease. Well, we now know that a high-fat diet does not cause heart disease. And we've got this from multiple meta-analyses. And meta-analyses is where they do a whole lot of different clinical trials where they look at what people are eating and look at what sort of illnesses and diseases that they get. And then they take all of the best trials, they put them together into a meta-analysis. And here, this was published just in 2016, showing that the trials actually do not support the current dietary fat guidelines, which are to limit your intake of fat. Everyone's heard the saturated fat leads to an increase in cholesterol in the blood, and this clogs the blood vessels, and this is actually false. So what about cholesterol? Everyone's concerned about their cholesterol, and everyone's had their cholesterol checked. One of the complicated things about cholesterol is that when you send your blood off to the lab to get tested for cholesterol, you get a whole lot of readings. You get your total cholesterol, your LDL cholesterol, HDL triglycerides, your VLDL, and sometimes others as well. And then they put them into ratios and make it all very complicated. And it's so complicated that most people can't understand it. And that's fair enough. And to simplify, what we should really be doing is just looking at two of those values, the HDL. And the HDL we know is good cholesterol. And we should also be looking at the triglycerides. And triglycerides are made in the liver in response to eating carbohydrates. And so what you want is for your HDL level to be greater than your triglyceride level, and that tends to be a sign that you're in good metabolic health. The only way, really, to reduce your triglycerides and to increase your HDL is to avoid carbohydrates in the diet. Interestingly, everyone knows of LDL as being bad cholesterol, but LDL is actually not bad cholesterol. LDL is the only cholesterol that pharmaceutical companies have devised a way to manipulate. So all of the cholesterol drugs reduce your LDL. And if we believe Ansel Keys that high cholesterol causes heart disease, then you might believe that reducing cholesterol might reduce heart disease, or reduce your LDL, you might reduce your risk of heart disease. This has actually been proven to be incorrect. And if there is any relationship between LDL and heart disease, it's only very weak, not nearly as strong as the relationship between your HDL and your triglycerides. So having a high carb diet leads to high insulin levels and reduces your good cholesterol and increases your triglycerides, which is your bad fats in the blood. So what about eating fat? Can we just eat any sorts of fats and oils? And well, the answer is no. What we should be doing is we should be eating healthy fats and oils. And it gets a little tiny bit complicated. And one of the problems is that saturated fat has been demonized. Everyone said, oh, saturated fat's very bad for you. Saturated fat is actually not bad for you, and we should eat a lot of saturated fat. Saturated fat comes in animal products, beef, lamb, pork, poultry, also dairy products, coconut oil, cocoa butter, like in dark chocolate, and also in eggs. It's also very rich in vitamins. It raises your HDL, reduces your appetite, and helps achieve weight loss. So we should be eating a lot of saturated fats. Monounsaturated fats we believe to be healthy. Olive oils, pecans, almonds, these are all healthy oils, and we probably should be able to eat as much of that as we like. However, it probably shouldn't be used for heating, because it can become rancid and change its chemical formula. Polyunsaturated fats are slightly more complicated because they come in omega-3 fatty acids and also omega-6 fatty acids. The omega-3s are the ones we know of being in fish and fish oils. Now, these are very good for us because they're anti-inflammatory. However, it's the omega-6 fatty acids, like the polyunsaturated fatty acids that are present in margarine, vegetable oil, canola oils, and also present in all of our processed foods that are very bad for us. They're all highly processed oils, and they cause our body to increase inflammation, and inflammation causes a lot of these diseases that we know of. So what should we be eating for health and for weight loss? We should just be eating real food. We should be eating, fish, meat, and vegetables that grow from above the ground. We should be avoiding all of this stuff. All of this stuff that you see in the supermarket that's made by food companies, doesn't matter how healthy the label says they are, it's all unhealthy. So we can put foods into three categories, what we should eat a lot of and pretty much unlimited of. And it's egg, animal products, dairy, the healthy fats that I've spoken about, nuts and seeds, and vegetables. And the numbers next to these vegetables are the amount of carbohydrate per 100 grams of the vegetable. And so you can see that all these vegetables are low in carbohydrate, around up to about 3 grams per 100 grams. So we can eat a lot of these vegetables, and most of them grow above the ground. What we should eat a little bit of is fruit. Fruit actually has a lot of sugar. And so the recommendation to increase your amount of fruit to eat is going to cause you to gain weight because of the sugar. We can eat a little bit of fruit, and the best fruit to eat is berries because it's the lowest in sugar. And vegetables that grow below the ground do tend to have more carbohydrates, so we probably should limit some of those. And dark chocolate, thankfully, is on that list, so you can have a bit of dark chocolate because that has less sugar in it than normal chocolate. But what we should be avoiding is all of these grain-based foods, flour, bread, no bread. Should not be eating brands, beans, cakes, biscuits. We shouldn't eat anything to do with corn, rice, pasta. We shouldn't have any artificial sweeteners or natural sweeteners. And drinks are often very high in sugar, especially fizzy drinks, fruit juices, vegetable juices, etc. We should be avoiding the seed oils, as I've said, the starchy vegetables. We should avoid all fast foods, processed foods, anything with added sugar. We should avoid soy. Soy is not a very good source of protein. It's usually highly genetically modified. It's got a lot of carbohydrate, as does corn. Everyone always asks about alcohol, and this is hilarious because I found this book on in my shelf. This book was published before I was born, so it must have been my parents' book. But the Drinking Man's Guide and the Diet Guide for the Thirsty Australians. I thought this is hilarious, so I definitely had a good read of this. And essentially, what it does is it promotes a low carbohydrate diet. It basically says if you're going to drink alcohol, you should abide by a low carbohydrate diet, and you won't put on weight. When it comes to alcohol, I think alcohol is fine. So obviously, drinking too much alcohol is not good for you for lots of other reasons. But often alcohols are low in carbohydrate, such as wine and spirits. What we need to be careful of is what's put with the alcohol. So beer is no good because it's got lots of carbohydrate. Mixing drinks is not good. So your gin and tonic's no good because tonic oil's got a lot of sugar. Mixing with juices and other soft drinks is where a lot of the problem comes in with regards to weight. And it's useful to start looking at food labels, but you need to know how to look at food labels and what to actually look at, because once again, they put lots of numbers on a page and they try and misguide you. And so here's cornflakes, a food that gets 3.5-star rating from the Healthy Star thingy that's completely flawed and you should never look at. And then they've got the nutritional information, and you can see that they've put a blue bar down there of what they want you to look at, and they want you to look at how much iron's in it. But what we should really be looking at is the carbohydrates, and we should be looking at the carbohydrates per quantity, so per 100 grams, because then you can compare one food to another food. And what they often do when they've got a lot of unhealthy stuff in their food, they make the quantity serve so low that if you're going to have a normal bowl of cornflakes, you might end up having 4 quantity serves. So just look per 100 grams. If we look at the carbohydrates, 82 grams per 100. Now, I would suggest that you should avoid foods if they have more than 5 grams per 100 grams. So this is hideously unhealthy. What about butter? We can eat butter. Butter is very healthy for us. It's a very healthy fat, but we need to be careful because look at this, Western Star Spreadable Original. We look at it and look at the ingredients: cream from milk, vegetable oil, and butter oil. Vegetable oil is cheap, And that's why they fill it with vegetable oil, so they can make more money out of it. And then look what else they've got. They've got like buttermilk powder, they've got emulsifiers, soy lectin, preservatives, flavor, acidity regulator, vitamins, color. Why do you need to put color in it? This means that you automatically, this is not a natural product. You should not eat it and just get rid of it. Here's another alternative that we have at home, Buttersoft, 100% pure butter. Look at the ingredients: cream from milk and salt and milk fat. So it's just pure butter, and that's why it's healthy for us, and that's what we should be eating. Here's thickened cream, gets 1 star on the Healthy Star rating. Look at the amount of carbohydrate is only 2.6 grams per 100 mils. So having thickened cream is healthy. What about the mayonnaise? It's real mayonnaise. It's 100% free-range eggs. It's committed to sustainably sourced oils. Let's have a look at what's in it. The other thing we should always remember when we're reading the ingredients is that the order in which things appear in the list of ingredients is by the product or the ingredient that is in that product in the highest amount. So there's rapeseed oil in this, 78%. And that's sunflower oil. This is a seed oil. This is a toxic oil, 78%. We should not be going anywhere near these products. So sometimes it seems a little bit difficult. You think, oh my God, you've told me all these things I can't eat. That's most of what I eat. What am I possibly going to eat? And so a few ideas, for breakfast, coffee is a good idea. Often I'll only have coffee and not have breakfast. If you don't feel hungry for breakfast, breakfast is not the most important meal of the day, so you don't have to eat it. Sometimes I have Greek yogurt with berries, other times bacon and egg, which is not on toast, or cook up an omelette. Lunch is sometimes difficult because if you go to a cafe for lunch, there's nothing you can get. You can't get anything that's not bread, rice, or pasta or potato. So it is difficult. So you need to be organised. So if you're not hungry for lunch, then you don't have to eat lunch. Otherwise, we make seed crackers at home and put cheese or some cold meats on seed crackers. Sometimes we'll have leftovers from the dinner the night before, cook up an omelette or make some scrambled eggs with trizio, mushroom, tomato and capsicum. And with dinner, essentially just some sort of nice meat and salad and vegetables, lots of fish. Sometimes we'll make a bolognese sauce and make zucchini noodles instead of having pasta noodles, or a curry with some cauliflower rice. And you can make whip up cauliflower into a nice sort of rice. We also use these books mostly. We have a few others, but there are some fantastic books out there that can help you, guide you through what you can cook and what you can eat. And so there's lots of options, and the food is actually really beautiful. You just need to take a little bit of time to prepare it. So how to lose weight? We know now these are three studies that have recently been published, all meta-analyses looking at lots and lots of different trials, all showing the same thing, that a low carbohydrate diet has outplayed a low fat diet almost every single time when they put them head to head in clinical trials. So we can be absolutely certain that low carbohydrate diet is the most healthy thing for us to do for our weight. So I said that I'd come to you with a challenge, and I think what you should do is have a think about this. I'm going to send you all of these slides tomorrow, so you can have all of the lists and you can have all the resources, and you can hopefully look up the books and go through what you currently do with regards to what you eat, and maybe do as what I did, even though I was taking kicking and screaming, and do it for 4 to 6 weeks. Just say to yourself, okay, I'm going to try this out and I'm going to see how I go, and see how you feel, and see if you feel like I did, start to feel better. During the 6 weeks I did, I lost about 8 kilograms. I've never put it back on. We've never looked back. It doesn't mean that I never ever eat carbohydrate. Sometimes I do, but for the majority of the time, I'll try and keep them low. So I challenge you to have a go. And I'd like people to put into the chat whether you're willing to have a go. Are you willing to, for 4 to 6 weeks at least, give this a go and see for yourself? Because the most powerful thing is to see it happen to you. You can read all the literature, you can hear all of the talks and people telling you what to do, but as soon as you see it happen to yourself, then you'll start to believe. Excellent. We've got some people there who are keen and willing. This is the low carb challenge, the 6-week low carb challenge that I did. And I think this is Vicky and Joe Curiel, and Vicky is the low carb dietitian who's about just embarking on a PhD looking at fasting, which is also going to be really fascinating. And so I'll get Leah to put the link into the chat now for Vicky's program. And I think Vicky might be here actually, in our audience actually. So if anybody's got any questions about Vicky's program, they should definitely ask, because I would absolutely highly recommend it. You can even do a 5-day trial for free, just to dip your foot in the water and just to see if you like the format. But essentially, this is an online program that takes you through all of the education in way more detail than what I've been able to do tonight. Probably explain things really well, push you into a Facebook group where there are lots of other people doing a similar sort of thing, sharing your wins, sharing your difficult times, sharing ideas, sharing recipes, and having a whole lot of help all the way through it. And I found that really fantastic for the motivation to get there. So I highly recommend that program. And the other one is, this program has just come out very recently, called Defeat Diabetes. And this has come about through Peter Bruckner, who's a well-known sports physician in Melbourne, who's been a sports physician of some of our very successful sporting clubs. And he went on his own journey of realising that despite living by the Australian guidelines, nutrition guidelines, he was putting on weight and he was pre-diabetic. And so he adopted a low carbohydrate diet, looked into it himself in a similar way, and lost weight, and he's become much healthier. And he has now got this program which is all about low carbohydrates, specifically for diabetics, but it's not just for diabetics. It's also just an education-based program with lots of menu ideas and meals and things. So I highly recommend that, especially if you are diabetic. I highly recommend having a look at this, because it does have information tailored to diabetics. So if you know diabetics, then you should certainly jump on and have a look at that one. One thing about diabetes that we do need to make a point of is that if you're diabetic and you take medication for diabetes, then you need to be careful when you lower your carbohydrates significantly. Just going to stop sharing. You need to be very careful if you lower your carbohydrates significantly. If you're a diabetic and you're not on medication, then that's fine, because lowering your carbohydrates is going to be a healthy thing to do, and it's going to improve your control of blood sugar. If you take medications for diabetes, tablets or insulin, then you need to be very careful, because if you lower your carbohydrates in your diet, you stop putting the sugar in, but you're still taking the medication to push your sugar down, then you can get into trouble with low sugar. Now, the way to address that, of course, is to stop taking the medication or reduce the medication. However, you need to be careful, and so you do need to consult with your GP or your doctor if you do decide to drop carbohydrates significantly and you are taking medication for diabetes. On that point, if you're a type 2 diabetic, there's a good chance that you could actually cure yourself of diabetes. The diabetes website doesn't tell you this. It describes diabetes as a progressive disease, which is really quite depressing, and one that will just continue to get worse. However, if you adopt a low carbohydrate diet, there's no reason why you might not be able to come off your insulin. You might be able to come off your diabetic tablets. It's just important to do it in consultation with your doctor, so you're keeping an eye on your sugar levels and you don't cause your sugars to go too low.
We've got a few questions just in the chat here, which I'll just go back to. And a question around the Pritikin Diet, which was popular in the 80s. Do you know much about that?
What was it called, sorry?
Pritikin Diet.
No, I haven't heard anything about it. Never heard of it.
No.
Pritikin.
If anyone else has got any.
Hey, Leah. It's Vicky here.
Oh, Vicky, thank you. Do you know the Pritikin Diet?
I'm in the dark, but I'm going to put the light on. The Pritikin Diet is, to my knowledge, a low-fat diet, and therefore completely opposite to what Barton has been speaking about today, and not something that I would be recommending. So
was Pritikin named after somebody, was it? I haven't heard of this Pritikin character.
I'm not exactly sure, but to my knowledge, it promotes low fat. It possibly is low fat as well as low carbohydrate. Don't
Right.
quote me on that, but not something I would be recommending.
No.
Yeah.
Vicky, while we've got you there, can you maybe just comment around processed meats, ham and salami, which a few people have asked about?
Yeah, sure. So there's quite a big difference between just going to the supermarket and purchasing salami and ham that's already been packaged, as opposed to getting a properly cured salami from like a farmer's market or from a butcher who is doing it. They are not processing the meat as in terms of adding sugars and undesirable additives and that sort of thing. It's merely a means of preserving it through a curing method. And so part of eating this way is just sourcing really good food. And so if you were going to include something like salamis or hams or that, it would be going a little bit out of your way to try and find places, butchers or markets where you could purchase good quality cured meats, not processed meats.
Lovely, thank you. It's nice to have you here too, Vicky.
Thank you.
We've got a comment around breakfast, and breakfast, dietitians believe breakfast is important because it kickstarts the metabolism after an overnight fast. Have I got some thoughts around that?
I'm sure that Vicky will know more about this than me, but I just think that that's absolutely false. That you can break your fast. You don't have to break your fast first thing in the morning. You can break your fast at lunchtime, or you can break your fast later in the day. I think that the human body is able to easily cope with prolonged fasting, and actually probably does quite well with prolonged fasting. I don't think that that's true at all, that breakfast is the most important meal of the day. And so often people get up in the morning and they actually don't feel hungry. And if you don't feel hungry in the morning, then it's not necessary to eat. So just eat when you're hungry. And one of the things that people notice is that when they drop the carbohydrates out of their diet, they actually feel, and I certainly found this, I wasn't hungry as often. So if you just eat when you're hungry, you're going to be way better off than forcing yourself when to eat, because Kellogg's told us that we should eat breakfast.
Yeah, I'd agree with that, Barton. And that term of kickstarting your metabolism, it's absolutely meaningless from a physiological point of view. There's no such thing. There's no hormones that jump up and down and start our metabolic rate in the morning because we've eaten breakfast. Our bodies just don't work like that. It's a false and mythical analogy. So it's something that we need to forget about.
And maybe substitute exercise. So I think if you were to get up in the morning and kickstart your day with some exercise, then you're going to get a lot more benefit from that in terms of mental clarity, how you feel, mental health for the rest of the day.
There's a comment here just around constipation also, which probably flows on quite nicely to the change in diet and the need for exercise as you do these things. Have either of you got a comment around management of that when you change your diet?
Well, this definitely happened to me. But carry on, Vicky.
Oh, sorry to interrupt, but I was going to say that it's very normal to have changes in your bowels when you change your diet. You're putting different things in, and so the way and it's going to come out can change quite dramatically. There's a lot of debate around the need for fiber that is recommended and the sources of fiber that are recommended, and that they can often be quite irritating to one's gut as opposed to being beneficial. A lot of people react quite negatively to different types of fibers, and so the reason why bowel movements might be occurring is because of this irritating factor, and it's not a good thing for us. When you change your diet to lower carbohydrate, what becomes really important and something that people forget about is your electrolyte intake. And when I say that, it's most specifically your salt intake, because when we have adequate salt intake, we maintain the correct amount of fluid in our bowel, which helps with constipation or helps with basically keeping us more regular. So it's not necessarily this default thinking of we need more fiber, we must have whole grains in order to be able to go to the toilet, but it's a little bit more involved in that, and electrolytes, particularly salt, can play a big role. I know that might sound quite controversial to many of you, but when you understand a range of things that happen when you change to a real food diet, salt becomes something that is quite important.
Thanks, Vicky. There is quite a few questions, but I will just focus on a couple just around the types of food that we're eating. So someone has said is chocolate. So chocolate is okay.
Not white chocolate, because dark chocolate contains quite a high amount of saturated fat, which is good for us. The darker the chocolate, the less actual sugar content there is and less carbohydrate there is. So if you stick to your 85% dark chocolate, you lean to 85% or 90%, then I think it's fine. You don't want to have too much of it because it's still at around 8 carbs, I think, per 100 grams. So you don't want to have too much, but you certainly can have some. I was quite pleased when I had a 24-hour glucose monitor put on, and I found out that I could eat the 85% mint chocolate with no blip in my blood sugar whatsoever. So I was quite pleased by that. Having said that, one piece of bread shot my sugar from where it was at 4 up to about 6.5.
And just to comment, someone has just asked around wheat bix. So I think sometimes breakfast can be a challenge for people. And one of the challenges around moving and changing your diet is actually learning about the things that, or alternatives to things that you can eat. So just have you got a comment around wheat bix, which obviously contains quite a few carbohydrates, but maybe suggest some alternatives that might be useful for people?
So I had some alternatives in there. So often I won't have breakfast, or I'll just have a coffee. Alternatively, you should be eating things like bacon and eggs. And you can have bacon and eggs as often as you like, just as long as you don't put it on the toast. You can cook up an omelette. If you don't want to have something cooked, then yogurt with berries is a good idea. So long as that yogurt is a full cream or full fat yogurt that is natural yogurt without any flavoring in it. So natural Greek yogurt is a very good one. What did you have for breakfast, Vicky? Did you have breakfast this morning?
No, I don't have breakfast. The first meal of the day for me is usually somewhere between 12 and 2. But when people transition to this way of eating, it can be quite difficult to get used to new norms, like not having breakfast. And so looking for breakfast alternatives initially can be quite challenging. But, I have 2 kids, 2 teenagers, and they've been eating this way for most of their life. And for them, breakfast is basically just another meal. It doesn't have to be a breakfast food. I think what's been drilled into us is that breakfast is in a bowl, cereal or oats or a piece of toast. And that's what we classify as being breakfast, but it's just another meal. And so they would treat it as any other meal. And, my daughter would very often have a bowl of chicken soup in winter for breakfast. They would have leftovers from the night before, and that might consist of meat or fish or chicken. They do have eggs. So breakfast is just, as I said, another meal. It's not, I wouldn't be going to something like nuts and yogurt on a regular basis. To me, that's not complete. We want a complete meal every time we sit down to eat, and a complete meal should include a good amount of protein. And protein comes from our animal sources, meat, chicken, fish, eggs, that sort of thing. So I'd be trying to focus on something like that. Wheat Bix to me is really incomplete. It's not providing us with any of our essential nutrients. And it's basically just a bowl of carbohydrates with nothing else.
I think actually breakfast is a good meal to go out for, though. I think it's lunch. I think is very difficult, but if you go out for breakfast, there are lots of good options. And my favourite thing to do going out for breakfast is just to pick off the sides. And so I just like pick the scrambled eggs, the avocado, the bacon, and anything else that's on there, and just have them not put it on toast. And you can actually put together a really nice, healthy meal from the cafe for breakfast.
Yeah.
Lovely. I'm just conscious of the time. So I might just ask, we have had a number of questions. So Barton, are you happy if people send in some questions that we can go through?
Yeah, absolutely. But if people are happy to hang around, then I'm certainly happy to continue to answer questions now, but I'm certainly happy to be emailed or.
Lovely. All right. While we're going, there's one here around the number of carbs per day.
I don't think there's a magic number. And I remember, Vicky, when we did your program, your recommendation was not to count carbs, and I think that's probably a good idea. I find it quite useful to look at food labels and have an understanding of the amount of carbohydrate in everything that you eat. And so, if you're going to eat something, you want to have a bit of an idea as to what the carbohydrate content of that food is. However, I don't think that you need to measure it up each meal or measure it up and work out what you've had throughout the day. If you make a conscious effort to keep it low, then you're probably doing a good thing. And essentially what you want to do is that you want to get to a point where you've reduced your carbohydrate significantly, you're eating good, healthy foods, and your weight is heading to where you want it to be. And if you're not losing weight, then you need to think, is there something that's causing me not to lose the weight? Like, is there a medical condition? So you need to speak to your doctor about that. Or is there a medication or something that's prohibiting you from losing the weight? Or is it that you actually are getting some hidden carbs in there? And so maybe it's a bit of fruit, or it's something else that you're having that you didn't realize was putting extra carbs in there. With regards to absolute amounts, when people talk about, our typical Australian diet, I think has about 250 grams of carbohydrate a day. I think we probably should be aiming for less than 100, but to be on a low carbohydrate diet, you probably want to be less than 50, but sometimes people will even take that further and get into the ketotic range, which is probably around 30 or 20 grams a day.
Hey. Any thoughts around eating the main meal like dinner? Should it be eaten earlier or later, or does that really matter?
I think that's another myth. Vicky, does it matter if you eat to the time of day that you have dinner?
Not necessarily. I think there is some benefit in trying to have your meals within daylight hours, which is really easy in summer because our bodies, if you think of, going back to our caveman days, we had to eat in the daylight because once it was nighttime, we couldn't see further than our hands. So, but what's more important around is working with the practicalities of your own individual circumstances. So if you are such that you work late and you only get home late and dinner is at 8 o'clock at night, and that's just how it has to be. What's important is that you have a period within your 24 hours that you are not eating, and that period should be at an absolute minimum 12 hours. So if you finish eating your last meal at, say, 8:30, 9 o'clock at night, then you should at least have a gap of 12 hours before you eat breakfast. So if you're then up in the morning at 6 a.m. and you eat something straight away, you've only given yourself a period of maybe 9 or 10 hours of fasting, whereas we need at least a minimum of 12 hours. So if you eat later, then breakfast needs to be later. If you eat really early, then breakfast can be early. So it's having that time every 24 hours where you don't eat. That's important.
So a good question here, Leah, about stevia.
Yes.
The opinion about stevia is not a classic artificial sweetener, as it comes from the leaves of the stevia plant, is not synthesized in the lab, and that is true. So that means that it's actually not an artificial sweetener; it's actually a natural sweetener. And so I think that means that stevia is a much healthier option than any artificial sweetener, much healthier than sugar. And stevia doesn't have that same effect on your blood sugar, or your insulin. It doesn't have the same insulin effect as sugar. And so I think that the stevia is reasonable to use. I think the problem with it, though, is that what we want to try and do is get to the point where our body's used to not having sweet food. And one of the things that I was amazed by when I got rid of the carbs and got rid of the sugar is that stuff that used to not taste sweet suddenly had a bit of a sweetness to it, such as, the 85% Lindt dark chocolate. People would say, oh, it's not very nice, it's bitter. But if you don't eat sugar all the time, it actually tastes very sweet. Or black coffee, just espresso coffee, has a sweetness to it. And so if we get rid of the sweeteners and things, then we actually start to improve our appreciation of a lot of these foods as well. And so if you're going from a diet that has a lot of sweeteners, a lot of sugars and carbohydrates in it, using stevia to try and reduce your sweetness intake, I think is probably a good idea. And you're much better off going to the stevia than going to the sugar and the carbs. So I think it's a good alternative, but probably not worth relying on too heavily. And the more sweeteners we can get away from it, the better. But we certainly absolutely should not be having artificial sweeteners. And so Diet Coke is not an alternative. People put weight on with Diet Coke. If some people drink so much Diet Coke and they put on all this weight and they stop drinking the Diet Coke and they lose weight. So Diet Coke is absolutely, like these Coke Zeros and all these artificial sweeteners absolutely should be avoided, and probably carcinogenic anyway.
Barton, there's a question here obviously around lactose-free milk, which is quite high in carbs and sugar. And do you recommend taking milk out altogether?
I don't think that you need to take milk out. I mean, milk does have sugar in it. So you shouldn't have skinny milk or any low-fat milk. You shouldn't have any low-fat products at all. This is just based on the ridiculous notion that we should be cutting out fat out of our diet. And the only way you can take fat out of the food is to put sugar in, because if you take fat out of the food, it tastes awful. And so they replace it with sugar. So you should definitely not have any low-fat dairy products. But so I think if you're going to have it, then having full-fat milk is fine. But it still does have a bit of sugar in it. So full cream milk has about 5 or 6 grams of carbs per 100 grams. So it's okay to have a little bit, but probably not too much of.
Thanks, Barton. There was a question around this. Is this recording going on to your YouTube channel? I think given our technological problems.
Maybe we'll do a re-record and try and record it a bit smoother.
Lovely, lovely. Look, I think we might wrap it up there, but please, I would encourage anyone, if you have questions, please email them in, and I'm sure Barton is more than happy to answer them. I'm more than happy to collate them for him and send the answer back to you. But just on behalf of Lung and Sleep, I'd really just like to say thank you all for attending. It is really new, well, not particularly new actually, but an exciting area to start to learn a lot about in, and dabble your feet in it. There's lots of books out there to read. There's lots of information out there. There's fabulous programs that you can get on board if you need a little bit of help to do it. And don't forget to enroll your GP with you on the journey so that you've got some support with you. But it's always great to find like-minded people who can help you along the way. So just on behalf of Barton and I, I'd just like to say thank you to Vicky too for helping out tonight. It's great to have you here. And
our initial inspiration when I had little faith.
Thanks for having me, guys. Always a pleasure to be in your company.
Really nice to have you all here, and please send in your questions if you would like to ask any more, and thank you for coming. And hopefully we'll see you again in another 3 months with another new topic to talk about. Thanks, guys.
Sounds good.